Here we go. We have former Harlem drug kingpin and author of the book, The Crack Era, The Rise, Fall, and Redemption of Kevin Chiles in the building.
Thank you for having me, Vlad.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, we've known of each other for a long time now.
That's
going
true.
Back almost 20 years.
That's a fact.
But this is actually the first time we're sitting down together.
Yeah, we've crossed paths a couple of times, but you're right, this is actually the first time, yep.
So let's go ahead and start in the very beginning. Well, you grew up in the Bronx.
Yes.
You were born in Highbridge. You were a kid in Highbridge.
I was a kid in Highbridge, absolutely, yep.
And then you moved to Soundview.
Right.
When you were 14.
Right. That's the Bronx as well, North Bronx.
Exactly. And you actually grew up in a two-parent home.
I did.
Your mom had two kids.
Myself and my little brother, my younger brother, actually, yeah.
What was the age difference?
2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, even though you had both parents, you guys were still struggling.
Yes.
Okay. So talk about the struggle as a kid.
Well, my mother worked consistently. My father worked construction, and back then construction might, last a month or so, maybe 2 months, 3 months, maybe 6 months at the most. Then he may not work for another 6 months. So it was just a job that really wasn't too stable.
Okay. And I mean, you were actually so poor that you were putting cardboard in your sneakers sometimes.
Yeah, I don't think it was just me. It was pretty common. This was the neighborhood that I lived in. Most people had the same economical status, so I think it was pretty common across the board. It wasn't just me and my brother. It was, kids of the neighborhood.
Right. You had holes in your socks, and
right.
Only a couple pairs of jeans. And
right.
Okay. So here you are. You're growing up in the Bronx. 2 kids. Dad is out of work a lot, which I'm sure is causing arguments in the house.
Absolutely.
And, as you're rolling around the Bronx, you're seeing all this money get made illegally on the street.
Yeah, at some point, yeah, that was what was happening.
Okay. At what point did you start to realize what was happening?
Probably the age 11, 12, 13. You just seen some of the neighborhood kids who was like maybe 7, 8 years older than me. You seen that, they were doing certain things. I wasn't quite sure what it was initially, but at some point you just sort of understand it because you're from the neighborhood, you pick it up.
Right, and this is the 70s at the time.
Yeah, it is, right, early 70s, yep.
Okay, and back then, heroin pretty much ran the drug trade.
I would come to understand that, yeah, at some point. I didn't know what it was, but as I probably became a teenager, I knew what it was then, yeah, so it was heroin, definitely.
I mean, were you seeing the heroin addicts on the streets and so forth?
Not so much in the Bronx. It was more in Harlem that I noticed it, junkies leaning and I guess what they would call dope fiends. Yeah, I noticed that more in Harlem, not so much in the Bronx.
Okay. And you had an uncle that actually was already a drug dealer.
Yeah, he was.
Okay. So talk about how you and your uncle started to develop your relationship.
Well, my uncle is not my blood uncle. It's my mother's sister's husband. And they was always pretty much well off, and there was a distinct difference between my family and theirs. So whenever I visited their house, they had cars and they lived in the suburbs. So it was a stark contrast from the Bronx to the suburbs, like literally night and day.
And you kind of became a chauffeur in a way.
Yeah, my teenage years, yeah.
All right, so you would drive him around while he was doing his various illegal activities, basically?
No, it didn't happen like that. During the 70s, well, during that time, most the guys who sold heroin, they actually used it as well as selling it. I mean, it was a social drug, so it was either cocaine or heroin. And one time I was driving with him, and he was sort of like nodding off, and it's sort of like it was a organic kind of thing, just due to our safety, and I had, just begun to learn how to drive, so I actually ended up start driving for him just for the sake of not us getting killed.
Right, and back then, I mean, both heroin and cocaine were just considered social drugs. Right. You would walk into a bar and people would sniff some cocaine right there out in the open.
Right.
I mean, these days that's unheard of.
Absolutely.
But back then it was just
commonplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think you had mentioned movies like Superfly.
Right.
All the fly dudes have like a little, vial of cocaine in their necklace.
Bills. They had in dollar bills or money. It was folded up in money. Yeah.
So you're kind of starting to see some of what's happening around your uncle. And back then, the Italians pretty much controlled the heroin business.
They absolutely did.
Yep. If you wanted heroin, you had to deal
with them. You had to have a connect
with the mafia.
That's a fact.
Okay. Did you ever deal with them later on?
No. By the time that I was in position, It was mostly Dominicans and Colombians at that point, and the drug of choice had changed. It wasn't so much heroin as much as it was coke and crack.
Okay. So at what point did you actually start selling drugs yourself?
Probably, well, I started selling marijuana in high school. You know, we would buy like $20 bags, $10 bags, and you would sell loose joints. You would maybe double your money. So if you spent $50, you made $100. And that was sort of like a hustle that I did in high school, you know, to get by. I mean, prior to that, I did odd and end hustles, but the actual progression to selling narcotics was marijuana in probably about the 10th, 11th grade.
Okay. When did it graduate to cocaine?
Probably my high school year, going into my first year of college.
Okay. And what was the first couple of deals like?
Selling like 50s and 25s and grams, well, half grams, you know, 8 balls, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess you were dealing with the Dominicans in terms of getting it?
Yeah, initially. Well, no, initially I was getting it from my uncle once I convinced him that, you know, I was going to do it with or without his help. I guess he figured it'd be better off if he sort of like oversaw what I was doing for the sake of, again, safety.
Okay, so your uncle was actually supplying cocaine for you?
Yes. Yeah, early on.
Early on?
Early on.
But then you graduated to?
Dominicans and Colombians.
Okay. And back then it was sort of I mean, you described it as a lawless time.
It absolutely
Where
was.
like the Nicky Barnes era before you literally had lines around the corner to the, you know, to the drug houses.
Right, it were.
Like broad daylight,
Absolutely.
cops driving around.
Right, like it seemed almost acceptable.
Like an open air market.
That's exactly what it was.
Why didn't the cops, I mean, the cops aren't stupid. I mean, they see what's happening.
I agree with you. You know, I don't know, I mean, you know, you look at a lot of movies from back then and a lot of law enforcement was on the take. I mean, even with that being the case, like it just was so obvious that there had to be an explanation for one that I couldn't provide.
Right, because who wants to live around that? Who wants to live next to a dope fiend house, you know, with junkies all around?
Right, you know, but if you were there in the landscape, it was so commonplace that it just appeared to be normal to the residents in the community because it's just what it was.
Okay, now your uncle had a lieutenant named Nappy Red.
No, Nappy Red his lieutenant was a guy named Norman. Norman was Nappy Red's uncle, and Nappy Red was his nephew.
Ah, okay. Sorry, I got it slightly wrong. And the two of you actually became friends.
We did, through the introduction through both our uncles, who we all consider ourselves family.
Got it. And then you guys actually went into business together.
Eventually, yeah, because he was running a spot himself, working in one.
Now, was this a coke spot or a crack
It
spot?
was a crack spot at this point. This is about 85, late 85, early 86.
Okay, so crack hit Harlem.
Absolutely.
Before then, it was just cocaine and heroin.
Right.
And there was freebase, but that was a rich man's drug.
Right.
You needed ether, and you needed to know what you were actually doing, or else you'd blow up your whole house trying to make
Yeah,
it.
Potentially, yes.
Or blow yourself up like Richard Pryor did.
That's a fact.
So people really didn't freebase that much.
No. I never witnessed anyone do it.
Right. But then crack came along,
Right.
and it was fairly easy to make.
Yeah.
You could churn a small amount of cocaine into a bunch of crack rocks,
Right.
and increase your profit a lot. And the addiction was a lot higher.
I guess it all depends on who you ask. The heroin addiction was pretty.
Well, compared to cococaine.
Yes. Yeah. That's true.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Compared to cocaine. Yeah, heroin addiction is horrible.
Right.
So when crack first hit Harlem and really the whole country, how did you really see it go down, and how did you see it affect your neighborhoods?
I think, well, early on, we didn't notice it because the transition between most guys who sold heroin were older guys. You know, when crack came about, the older hustlers who sold heroin weren't overly interested in selling crack. It was a novelty to them because of the amount of money that they made selling heroin. There's an extreme difference in selling heroin and selling crack. So it was a bunch of young kids was doing it, and I don't even know if we were our perspective of it was where we was evaluating to see what it would be years later where we would realize the devastation that occurred from it.
Right, because I remember I interviewed Freeway Ricky a bunch of times, and he was saying how people really don't become crackheads overnight. It's
No,
a
it was
relatively slow process. And I mean, he was saying how he was selling to his own relatives at the time.
Well, some of the guys who I was down with, some of their family members were using it.
Yeah.
And at the time, again, we didn't see the wrong in it.
Right. Did you ever sell it to your own relatives?
No, I didn't have anybody that in my family who actually used crack. I don't ever remember anybody that that I knew personally from my family. No.
So, you and Nappy Red started your own crack house.
Right.
And I guess there was 12-hour shifts. Each of you were working it.
Right. He would take, well, it was 24 hours. He would take one shift and I would take the other shift.
Right. Yeah, that's what I meant. Mm-hmm. Okay. And how successful was that first crack house?
Initially, it was fair. It wasn't like he had worked in a spot prior to that was actually probably doing anywhere from 30, 40,000, maybe 50,000 a day. A day.
Wow.
Right. So when we first started out, we probably started making a couple of hundreds, then a couple of grands, and probably at our peak, we was making anywhere from the same thing and the spots that we had.
Okay, so you have your first crack house, you're working 12-hour shifts yourself.
Right.
And you guys are fairly new on the block, pretty much.
Well, they all grew up in Harlem.
Okay.
So, it wasn't uncharted territory. They grew up, so we knew, they knew the people from the neighborhood. So we was from the neighborhood.
Right. But that still attracts a lot of attention.
Seemingly you would think that, but when you're from the neighborhood, you just sort of know the landscape. People know you know them.
Okay. Any initial problems, with that first spot? Robberies?
Well, never. It wasn't so much any robberies, but you always have the police that from time to time that are coming. It was really odd because during that time in Harlem, it was a lot of abandoned buildings. Like Harlem is nothing like what it appears to be, what it is presently, like with gentrification. But back then, it was a lot of abandoned buildings. And what's so odd is that we actually took over a building. I mean, and that's probably where the concept for the car that came from New Jack City. Mm-hmm. That was actually really real. We went into a space. We put metal doors up. Lights. We ran electricity. Illegally. And we sort of just really took over buildings.
Right, but that's a brownstone you're talking about.
Well, no, the brownstone was the spot that he had worked in at one point, but same thing.
Right, so you're talking about an actual apartment building?
5, 6-story building, yes.
Really? With how many units in that building?
5 floors, maybe 5, 6 units on the floor, but
so 25 units.
But we didn't need the 25 units. We only had the main floor. When you walked in off the street, the first apartment. Again, the whole building was abandoned. So it was, you might have stashed something in another apartment, but then he worked out of this apartment. And if that apartment got hot, then you sort of moved it around a little bit.
Okay, so you guys are running this operation and you're starting to make real money.
Right.
How do you start to expand at that point?
Well, when you start making money, he had a reputation, like I said, from being a person from the neighborhood, and he had been making money prior to. So by the time I got with him, he started introducing me to the people that he knew, and from there, people see you making money, especially young folks. We're talking about teenagers. We 18, 19 years old. So when other teenagers see you making money, it just sort of naturally evolves. It's not like you have to recruit. People see you making money. You're in a poverty-stricken neighborhood, and people who once seen you just maybe a year ago not really having nothing, to then 1 year later you're driving around in foreign cars, it just evolved.
Right, but recruiting someone for a legitimate job, like a sneaker shop, like you would own later on, is a whole lot different than bringing someone into an illegal operation that could potentially bring down the whole operation.
Right, but we're kids again. You got to keep in mind that we're literally adolescents. Like, I don't think there was a blueprint or any real thought process that was in place. We was just like, if you wanted to work, then we worked with you. As we evolved, the scrutiny came into play because certain things start happening. You just naturally evolve from experiences.
Right, because Harlem has a long history of drug dealing.
They absolutely do.
Barnes, the Frank Lucases,
and
the
we
Bumpy
grew up
Johnsons.
idolizing all of those guys.
Yeah, those were like the
who we idolized. We idolized them, absolutely.
Right. Okay. So how did the operation really start to grow?
It started picking up as far as, like I said, early on, from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands. And with that, your crew got bigger, more people ultimately ended up working with you. You started expanding the operation. And you just started, a reputation started, our reputation started growing in the neighborhood.
Okay. At your height, you said that you were netting $300,000 a week.
And that's when I was in D.C.
Okay.
And that's later on.
Later on. Early, I mean, at the height of that time, while still being in New York, how much were you netting? Or how much were you grossing?
Well, it's hard to say because no 2 days are the same, but you got to figure if you got a shift and you're making 40, 50 grand on certain days, it didn't just end there because with your reputation growing, then other drug dealers started gravitating to you, looking to purchase drugs for you. So outside of whatever you may have been doing in your spots, you would start wholesaling to other individuals. And back then you would sell like ounces mostly to, again, we're teenagers. So you got kids who would be hustling on their own little blocks, make their money, make $1,000, and you're selling ounces for $1,000. Then you run in your spot. So you had a lot of that going on. So on top of what you may have been doing through retail or selling through your spot, then you had individual wholesalers. So, it's certain days you may make $75,000, you may make $100,000. It all depends on what's going on.
Okay, and you guys started to move out of town.
Right.
And Washington D.C. became kind of a regular destination
right.
for you.
And the reason being that we ended up in D.C. is because the amount of money that you make in New York City was a lot of money, but as we evolved, so did everything around us, and crack became pretty popular. So you had people selling crack everywhere. So at some point, conflict started occurring, and then you start getting hot. And I had ventured out to D.C. because a friend of mine had went to D.C. and came back in like 2 days and had sold like 2 eighths. And back then the eighth was like $2,500 an eighth. So that's 2 eighths is like $5,000. So basically he took $5,000 of drugs and came back in 2 days with like $15,000, literally in 2 days.
Triple his money.
Right, and it wasn't a lot of money because we was already making a lot of money, but the way he sold it and the ease that he sold it at intrigued me. So I ventured down to D.C. with him.
Right, that became kind of a regular stomping ground for you for years.
Yeah, because of the amount of money that we was making. Because you can buy in New York City at the time, a kilo may have been $20,000 straight from when you purchased it. Mm-hmm. That same kilo in D.C. you could have sold for 5 or 6 points more than what it was, just as is, before you did anything to it.
Well, but then eventually things got crazy in D.C.
Well, whenever illegal money is being made, negativity comes with money. Money comes with problems.
Well, 4 people you knew got killed in D.C.
Way more than 4 people.
Way more than 4.
Way more than 4 people.
Okay, how many people did you know that got killed in D.C. exclusively?
I couldn't even count on. I couldn't. A ridiculous amount of people lost their lives in D.C. Like, I mean, if I had to put a number on it, well over 30 people probably lost their lives in D.C. throughout the time I was there.
And this was over drug deals gone bad, robberies?
Yeah, anything that falls under the umbrella of selling illegal narcotics. There's no rules.
Okay. Did you yourself have any problems in D.C.?
You always have problems. It's just how you go about resolving them.
Okay. Well, you guys went to go see Scarface.
All right.
And, if you saw the Paid in Full movie, they're saying how that kind of like inspired everyone in Harlem. You saw this Cuban guy become a drug millionaire.
The country, it didn't just, any person from the crack era can tell you that they was influenced by Scarface.
Right. Well, that made you guys actually go to Miami.
Again, we kids and we was ignorant as hell. We actually did. We saw the movie and we thought everything in it was real, and
right.
We ventured off to Miami, right.
So you and your friends went to Miami
looking for Al Pacino
to buy cocaine without any sort of connections whatsoever.
Without any
a bunch of black kids in Miami.
With a bunch of jury on and money. That's exactly what we did.
And you guys actually managed to cop.
We actually did.
3 kilos.
Yes, we did.
How hard was that process to actually get from nothing to 3 kilos?
Oh, at that time when we went to Miami, 3 kilos, we was way beyond that at that point. Like, so that was just the money we took.
Right, but going literally from nothing.
To get to selling 3 kilos?
To get to buying 3 kilos. Without knowing a single person.
Oh, you're talking about once we was in Miami?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, we went with the intentions on it. What actually happened was there was a drought in New York at the time. And what a drought is where a shipment coming into the country may got caught. And the price of drugs would go from, we might have been paying 20 at the time to maybe 40 or double.
For a kilo?
If you're even able to get it. And
okay.
During that time, a drought had came about, and we probably had just saw the movie, maybe, within the last couple of months or something or whatever. And I don't know who came up with the bright idea. It was probably a collective thing, and we just jumped on a plane with a bunch of money, our jewelry, and went down to Miami, and in hopes of finding a connect. Ironically, the guy that we bumped into was actually trying to set us up. And he had just kept taking us from place to place, but again, we was just so brazen and stupid that we just didn't think, we felt invincible. And that's the thing with money, and especially when you give money to adolescents. You just think you own the world. Like, you got to figure we were newly rich, there was no precedent set for us. There was no financial literacy. We had money and we just felt like we owned the world. So we was fearless, But we end up actually meeting a guy from Florida, a very well-known drug dealer. He's passed away now. His name is Sam Ferguson. They called him P-Man Sam. He was a very well-known drug dealer down there. And when we met him, he had owned a bunch of clubs and car washes and things of that sort. And when he met us, once we started talking to him, he told us, he said, the guy that that introduced y'all to me, he was trying to stick y'all up, but I guess it just didn't play out. We was from the street, so we sort of we just wasn't gonna just walk into just something foolish, But anyway, he ends up legitimately introducing us to Sam, and from there, that's where a relationship came from.
Right, and you actually bought the kilos, put them in your luggage on a plane, and just flew back.
Yes, we did.
The stupidest thing ever.
Well,
in retrospect.
Yeah. Well, at the time, all of the things that they have in play with at the airport now, it was none of that.
There's no. Yeah,
there was nothing.
There's
no scanners. There was nothing. Right.
Nothing.
There was nothing. Like, it was a free fall. Right.
Right, and I guess you try to keep that Miami business going, but it was just treacherous trying to get these.
Well, actually, it wasn't.
Back.
Actually, it wasn't, because again, what supports a lot of the ideals that we did, we was just ignorant. So we would get it, jump on a plane, and at some point, because we was going back and forth to D.C., people started getting caught on the plane in D.C. Mm-hmm. So just because of that experience, it made us reluctant now to start getting on a plane from Miami. So then all we did, instead of getting on a plane, we just now started getting on a train.
Right. But then people were getting caught on the train as well.
At some point, yeah. The police back then seemed like they always was a couple of steps behind whatever was going on.
I mean, in general, during this time, who was your main plug? Was it still Dominicans? Did you go to Colombians?
We sort of like bounced around because, again, the same ideology we used when we went to Florida was what it was in the city. Like, in New York City, especially Harlem, back then, the Colombians were bringing the drugs into the country, and the Colombians had relationships with the Dominicans, culturally, more likely because they spoke the same language, the way the drugs was being shipped in out of the country and then brought in. So there's something called Broadway in New York City, and like from maybe 135th and Broadway to maybe up into the 70s in Broadway, you could literally just drive up to Broadway and they just be peddling narcotics on the street. So it just wasn't as complicated as some people would think, but then you always ran the risk of getting robbed, because with that came a lot of robberies if you didn't know the right person. But it wasn't really that difficult to get drugs. I mean, what made you different from another person is if you met the right individual who got drugs at a certain price, because then that allowed you to always beat out everybody else's price.
Right, that was like Azie's claim to fame. He had the plug that was getting.
And that's going to be the case in any instance.
Okay, did you ever have that one plug that was just applying massive weight?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, and what country did this guy come from?
He was a Colombian.
Colombian?
Right.
Okay. Does this have anything to do with Pablo Escobar?
I mean, I wouldn't directly know that, but you would have to assume that. I mean, if you know your history or anything about narcotics, at some point, the majority of drugs came from one cartel. And ultimately, once it got to the States, whatever.
They never asked you to fly to Colombia to meet, who the plug reported to get a cheaper price, or it never got to that level?
No, I think my relationship with the person that I was dealing with, was a very intimate and personal relationship. Meaning, when you start making a certain kind of money and you're getting consignment, then they sort of know where you live, you sort of know where they live, so the relationship gets real personal, real intimate, because at any given time you owe someone millions of dollars, you know. So
Okay.
yeah, but no, it was never nothing like that.
Like, if you look at your whole drug career, what was the most number of kilos you bought at one time?
Well, probably 50, but the methodology that I used for myself more specifically was I never wanted to have more drugs than I could pay for. You know, there's this cliche for people who get to talking that, you know, something can go wrong. And the more evolved I became in the business, you had to always be mindful of taking a loss, because they would give you whatever you wanted, but you're responsible for that.
Yeah.
You know, and that situation can get ugly, because what can happen is you can go pick up a shipment, turn a corner, and run into the police, and there it is.
Or run into the Jack Boys.
Or whoever. Yeah. You know, so at some point as I evolved, I would rather go 3 times a week and get 50 than get 200 at one time and run the risk of.
Okay.
So that was my mentality.
So at 50 kilos, what kind of wholesale price were you getting?
Probably 15 when they was selling for 21, 22. So I would like immediately walk out the door and could put 5, 6 points on something.
Okay, so that's $750,000 of product
Right.
that you're walking out of the door with. Right. Have you ever gotten the whole package robbed? Like
Never.
Never. Okay. What were to happen if you came back to your plug and said, the police got all 50 kilos, sorry?
With the relationship that I had, I just would have worked it off. But I always paid for at least half of whatever I took.
Okay.
And then as soon as I went to the street, as soon as I got the first half, I would make sure that they were good. So I didn't, you know, that's just how I worked. I was, you know, principled like that.
Have you ever seen anyone basically fuck up a huge package like that with like the Colombians and unable to pay that back?
No, I can't say anybody that I know. I think everybody, you know, television purports it to be a certain kind of way, but everybody thinks about that. Like, you know, for me, when I moved a certain kind of way, it was a production. Yeah. You know, I would make sure that people was in certain places and they would call and say, the coast is clear, and you know, you can move now and you can move there. You know, so it was a production when I copped.
Okay. Well, here you are, teenager, early 20s, coming from poverty, and suddenly you have millions of dollars in cash.
Right.
Flowing through you.
Right.
Can't put it in the bank.
Right.
Can't pay taxes on it.
Right.
So you have to spend it.
Yeah, but I had quite a number of businesses, so I did figure out how to legitimize what I was doing.
Well, the first thing you start buying is cars.
That's what every kid does.
I guess you had like 6 cars at any given time.
Yeah, and that was pretty common, so it just wasn't a me thing. That was pretty common.
Yeah, and you know, in the neighborhood, all the various D-boys would compete with each other about who had the hottest cars.
Right.
And
well, especially in Harlem.
Especially in Harlem. And at one point, you paid $70,000 for a custom Benz shipped from Germany.
Yes.
And that car just caused nothing but problems.
Nothing but problems.
Explain.
I went to jail. The first thing was it was a hybrid, so it was a cross between a 190 and a 300. So the first thing is you never saw it. So, you know, at some point I think police have become, you know, used to seeing BMs and Mercedes, you know, that kind of thing. And then it was red, so that didn't help. You know, but I would get pulled over all the time in the car. You know, and this one particular day I got pulled over, and I guess the police just didn't like my tone, you know, or my disposition. Because again, I'm a 21-year-old kid. I got more money than I know what to do with. I'm arrogant. I'm cocky. You know, the money's inflated my ego, and you know, we just didn't care about blue and whites. Like we talked to them like, you know, with little regard, with no fear. You know, because they just, you know, it's just so different now. I mean, then than it was now. But in any event, I ended up getting locked up. You know, the car was legitimate. You know,
but it was in someone else's name though.
Yeah, it definitely was.
She was living in the projects, so
Yeah, on welfare as a matter of
On
fact.
welfare.
On welfare as a matter of fact.
With a car that's the equivalent of about 150,000 today.
Right, but the thing is, they didn't know that.
Right.
But you know, and when these stories are told, what was not stated for clarity and for some understanding is the streets were full of young guys just riding around in luxury cars making money. So you know, to do it today, you're just a damn jackass. But you're a kid and you look around and everybody's around you sort of doing these kind of things. It didn't feel abnormal.
Right. I guess at one point you sold the car to Rayful Edmonds.
Well, I attempted to because I had been in D.C.
Yeah, that didn't work out.
Right, it didn't. And I had shipped the car all the way down there and because he was supposed to purchase the car. Because this was the second time the car got taken. Then it got taken in D.C.
Yeah.
When I went to attempt to sell it to him. And the person literally drove it out of the storage unit because I shipped it down to D.C. to put it in the storage unit for him to come look at it. And when I spoke to my guy on the phone and he was in the process of taking it to him to look at it, he got arrested and the car got taken again.
I think you finally sold the car for 4 kilos.
Yeah, to some to Dominicans.
To just like get rid of it.
I had to,
I'm done. Well, New Year's Eve, 1987, I guess you had a good year that year. So you and your brother jumped in a Jeep.
Well, actually my cousin.
Your cousin, sorry.
Yeah.
Jumped in a Jeep and explain what you did.
Again, we kids again, you know, it's wintertime. You said it, New Year's Eve, took the top off the car. It's a Jeep. We took the top off the car and we just rode through Harlem, just throwing money, you know, just throwing money.
Just thousands of dollars.
Yeah, just throwing money. Yeah. You know, that's part of the goodwill too. Like when you're getting money, you know, and you know, you're in love with your community, and maybe for all the wrong reasons, but you just always want to, you know, you want to give back because you knew what it, you know, what difference those few dollars may have made for somebody. Because just you got to think, I'm probably in the game 2 or 3 years at this time, and 2 or 3 years before then, $100 could brighten my day. So when you see the reaction from that, you know, and it boosts your ego, and it's like selling narcotics as a teenager, and maybe even as a grown man, it's an energy that you can't even describe.
Yeah, but you know, the dichotomy of it is you're throwing money into the community and helping people out, and at the same time you're killing the community.
You do.
Causing addicts and causing crack babies. And
But you know, I don't know what the justification was for us at the time, because again, you're talking about young adults, and you just seeing the difference that it's making in your life and for your family. And then I think at some point you might say, if I don't do it, somebody's gonna do it, you know? So you justify it. You make it make sense.
Yeah. Well, you started opening legitimate businesses.
Yeah.
You opened a sneaker store.
Well, that came out of the fact that the sneaker culture was as big then as it is now.
Yeah.
And every like you would go to our houses and we would have 200 or 300 pair of sneakers in our closet. And so for me, I said to myself, I got 30 friends and we all making money. If I didn't sell nothing to nobody but them, I'm gonna have a successful business. That's what my thinking was. It didn't turn out like that though, but that was my thinking.
Well, the store was broken into at one point.
Early on.
Yeah. Cash register was...
Right. I think people in the community figured it wasn't, because again, what I was doing at the time I was doing it was unprecedented. Mm-hmm. You know, I was a young guy who was starting businesses. So they didn't have anything to precede what I was doing. So I think what they assumed was this was just a front to stash out drugs and money.
But there were no drugs in there.
No, it was a legitimate business.
Well, you opened a clothing store.
I did.
You opened a restaurant.
I did.
You had 2 laundromats.
I did.
And did you sponsor the first record tournament?
Well, the guy, Greg Marius, was a friend of mine. And the tournament was, it was years in. But back then, he just wasn't managing the money right. Like, you know, you had to pay for refs and different things like that. So whatever the entry fee was, it didn't cover the cost of the tournament to its duration. So we were friends, so he would come by and I would give him money, and times he would fall short for trophies and different things like that. So I just helped him out.
Gotcha. Well, and back then you actually knew Carl Kanai.
Yeah. I was introduced to Carl Kanai from a guy from Brooklyn, another well-known drug figure in the underworld. He knew I was into businesses and he knew I had a clothing store, and this is when Carl Kanai was just starting. Yep. I mean, he was actually making samples at the time. So yeah, I didn't only meet him. I was trying to go into business with him.
Right. I actually spoke to him this morning.
Oh, did you?
About it. Yeah, he's a friend of mine. I've
Okay.
interviewed him before.
So then what did he tell
Yeah.
you?
Well, he basically said that you guys talked about investing,
Right.
but it never happened. I think the
did.
Cross Colors deal started coming
It
together
did.
during that time, and
That's a fact.
you know,
Yeah.
an established company like Cross Colors.
Yeah.
He didn't say this,
But he made the
you
right
know,
choice. I mean, looking back on it.
if you look back on, it's probably a better investment partner than
Yeah, I think so.
a notorious drug dealer, basically.
Yeah, I agree.
At 21 years old, you bought a $400,000 house.
Right.
And not only did you buy the house, but you added a pool and a basketball court in the back of it.
I did.
Then later on, you bought a $700,000 house.
I did.
With NBA players next door to you and the such.
Yeah, it's in Bergen County. It's one of the most affluent neighborhoods. Still is presently. Yeah.
How are you laundering all this money?
Well, I had several businesses at this time.
So the businesses, the laundromats, which is a cash business.
Right. And the clothing store and all the business. I mean, my mother, which we sort of skipped over, she worked in the bank.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about the story of your mother.
So I just wanted to say that I had understood how business worked, you know, pretty early on. So the businesses was all legitimate and they was making legitimate income. So my mother actually established credit for me early on. So everything was actually, you know, legitimate businesses that I was able to show a return on my investments.
Well, you had a crew of, I mean, was it about 100 people or so affiliated with you?
At one point.
Yeah. And these guys were all getting busted at various times. Yeah. And you'd be the one that have to come up with their bails. Right. And then they would usually skip.
No, I would suggest it. Like I wouldn't, like if they didn't want to go back, the money was you know, in regards to the money, your freedom is priceless. So if, you know, they got convicted and they allowed us to have an appeal bond to pay, I would pay that out and tell them don't go back.
So they would just go on the run?
Yeah, they would go on the run.
And you literally lost millions of dollars.
In bail money.
In bail money.
Absolutely.
Millions of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was just part of the cost of doing business.
Yeah, and I love my guys.
Along with success on this level, you start to build up a culture of people who were robbing the drug dealers.
Yeah, they go hand in hand.
Yeah. There's a kid named Shavar.
Yeah. Who
I guess was 14 at the time.
Right.
You had just met him, and he got robbed like right afterwards.
The second day I met him. Not 24 hours
Not
after I met him.
24 hours.
Not 24 hours after I met him.
And this was like on one of the blocks that you controlled.
Right.
So you actually ended up getting into a shootout over that situation.
Yeah, we did.
Was that the first shootout you were in?
It probably was. Yeah, it probably was.
Okay. And you didn't get shot.
No, he got shot though.
He got shot, and I guess the guy who robbed him got shot. But that was just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that was pretty early on. That was probably like 86, maybe 87, yeah.
Right, because then entire crews started to build up that didn't want to deal drugs but wanted to rob drug dealers.
Right.
I guess there were white guys that were going around dressed as cops.
Right.
So what would happen in those situations?
When Harlem specifically, anybody who knows anything about Harlem, and more specifically in New York City, Harlem's where everyone goes and all five boroughs come to like hang out because that's where, they call it money making Manhattan. So it was on full display when you went to Harlem. Like you could just walk up and down and you could feel the money, like especially during that time, it was just money everywhere. And like you said, there were guys who eventually, no different than we developed crews, there's always a anti to anything, a left or right, up or down, a go or stop. People making money, people taking money. So yeah, these individuals figured out, which was ingenious when you think about it, because it probably was someone from the neighborhood that probably did some time, knew some white guys that fit the bill, you know, and what they were doing was they would pull you over in unmarked cars, you know, and pretend badges around their necks, the whole thing, and pretend to be police officers. And a lot of times they would handcuff you and put you in the back of the car. Once they literally kidnapped you, you know, they would force you to make a phone call and, you know, tell somebody, hey, you know, I'm kidnapped, bring X amount of money. And in most instances, people complied because who do you go tell? Like, you're a drug dealer, so this is sort of like part of the cause.
Right, because in the previous, time frame, the Italian mafia was running that.
Right.
So you knew that if you robbed one of these guys,
Right.
you were robbing
the risk.
You were robbing the mafia.
That's a fact.
And there was real repercussions because you're robbing a whole organization.
That's a fact.
Not just a crew of 1 or 2 or 5 people.
Right. That's true.
So there was a level of fear.
Right.
But then once you guys took over and no longer had to deal with the Italian mob, there wasn't that level of kind of fear and respect with the robbers.
Well, there was always respect, but there are certain people who are short-sighted when it comes to just money, because what happens when you have money, you have power, But you're right as far as the description between the one concept versus the other.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, then, I mean, surprisingly enough, the robbery crews actually had their own names.
They did.
There was the Young Guns.
They were.
There was the Lynch Mob.
Well, that was a drug organization that was a component of some things that they did,
Okay.
right? Given opportunity presented itself, yeah.
Then there's Preacher's Crew.
Right.
And they would be robbing, killing, and extorting drug dealers.
Right.
And at one point, someone started to turn on each other.
I don't know that to be so much.
Well, I mean, in your book, there was, I guess, the Young Guns had robbed somebody.
Right.
And they hired the Lynch Mob to basically set them up and kill them.
Well, that was a situation where that happened. There was an individual that definitely got robbed, and one of the drug dealers was hitting another organization that the person who was basically getting extorted and robbed reached out to them and said, "I have a problem," and the person who they was hitting in that organization said, we could take care of it for you.
Right.
Right.
So they basically, I guess, had a meeting with 3 members of the Young Guns. And it was
Right.
an ambush. The 3 of them just got killed.
Right.
Then there was Clarence Preacher Heatley.
Right.
AKA the Black Hand of Death.
Right.
That's really what they called him?
I think that might have came from the press. I mean, we didn't call him that. We just knew him as Preacher.
Well, he pled guilty to 13 murders.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, not only did he kill people, but he would torture them.
Right.
Then they just dismember the bodies. I guess he had kidnapped Bobby Brown at one point.
Yeah, I found that out after the fact, but yeah.
And I guess he was actually linked to the kidnapping of Rich Porter's younger brother.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Which I want to talk about in a little bit. So you kind of had these serial killers basically on the street.
I guess, yeah, if you look at it and you define what a serial, you could define them as such, yeah.
So you guys had to protect yourselves.
Absolutely.
And it turned into, you described it as an arms race.
Right.
Where you literally had stockpiles of guns and body armor.
Yeah.
And so you would be basically leaving the house, you'd put on your vest, strap your gun in, and prepare for war, knowing that every day you leave the house might be your last day.
As ignorant as that sounds, that was very true. Looking back on it, you question what was I thinking about, but that was the reality. You got dressed and you just you didn't know if he was coming home.
Was there ever a point where you said, look, I got, let's just say $1 million in cash that I could put aside. I could move to another part of the country or to a different country, take my family with me, and just start some legitimate business or somewhere else, start over. I'll never go to prison. I'm good.
I think throughout it all, the guys around me, some of them we didn't all share in the same sort of mindset to some degree. Some did, some didn't. But I do remember at a very low point in my life that was my thinking. But I also remember a lot of people hadn't sort of planned for a rainy day, and they depended on me to continue doing what I was doing. And I felt as though I would have probably been selfish, then I would have been turning my back on them. And it was really a bond and a brotherhood between me and my guys, you know what I mean? It's like one for all and all for one, and that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah.
So it just didn't seem like an opportunity presented myself to where I could have just left and they would have been good.
Well, at one point in your own crew, a war started between a guy named Jason and T-Money.
Well, they wasn't a part of my crew.
Oh, wasn't your crew?
They was just some of the guys that I came up hustling with in Harlem.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, there was a.
But you knew them. These were your friends.
Yeah, they were my friends.
And they started to kill each other.
Yeah, they
and
did.
At one point, within 6 months, like 12 people got killed over that war.
It went back and forth. Yeah.
Could you have tried to step in and done anything about that, or was it just beyond you at that point?
You know, it was just a domino effect. Once one person lost their life, somebody felt the need to retaliate, and like you said before you knew it, you know, yeah, at least 12 people had lost their lives.
So, at what point did you meet Rich Porter?
Early in 86, 85, he went to jail around that time. So when we first started out in Harlem, it felt like it was almost like two crews. Me and most of my guys were from the Bronx, and a lot of those guys were from Manhattan. You know, lived in Manhattan, went to school in Manhattan. Most of us was from the Bronx, lived in the Bronx, raised in the Bronx. But the Bronx and Manhattan is literally a bridge, 155th, several bridges that take you from out of the Bronx and into Manhattan. So when we first ventured down into Harlem, I actually partnered up with someone who was from Harlem, which was Red, as I stated earlier. And as my reputation grew, I started bringing my guys down from the Bronx, who I grew up with. So it was like the guys who was from, the younger guys who was from Harlem who was getting money, and then it was sort of like us.
Okay. So you guys knew each other and you were friendly with each other, but you had your own operations.
At that time, we was casual acquaintances. You know, we would see each other at car washes and events, basketball games, that kind of thing.
Just to kind of put it in perspective, and this is not like a pissing contest or anything, you know, because Rich is gone at this point.
He is.
Who do you think was the bigger entity, money-wise? Like, who was making more money? Was it your crew or was it Rich Porter's crew?
Well, before it was actually Rich, it was Azie.
Yeah.
Before it was actually Rich. But actually, you know, I'm misspeaking. Rich was getting money actually before Azie was getting money.
Yeah.
But Rich had caught a case, and during that time, and it's just going to show you how fast the crack era took off. So literally from 85 to 86, while he was away, things just mushroomed. And when he came back home, you know, he quickly got up to speed and got back into the game. But initially, Azie was the matriarch of that situation.
Right, because, well, Azie had the connect.
Right.
He was bringing all the drugs in.
Right.
So, well, at the height of Azie's operation and your operation, who do you think had the bigger one?
I'm not being egotistical, but I mean, we quickly caught up to them and surpassed them. I mean, Azie's situation that happened to him happened in '87.
Okay.
We was just getting going, you know. So he was in and out really.
Okay, so you guys kept going after he was.
I didn't get caught to '94.
Okay, got it. I see what you're saying.
Right.
You guys had more time to actually grow. But you and Rich actually became friends at one point.
We did.
And you were actually together when he got the phone call about his little brother getting kidnapped.
Well, I wasn't. He beat me.
Okay.
Right. Because I had a situation that happened to me a year prior to what happened to him, or what happened with his little brother.
With your mother.
Right. With my mother.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that.
So, and we had become friends because this is like 89, 90 now. So this is 4 or 5 years later, and at some point, him and I had became really tight over the years. And when the situation happened with his little brother, he beat me, and I remember it. I mean, you know, certain tragic things happen in your life. You just remember what you were doing that day, damn near what you ate and what you were wearing. But this specific day, I was downtown shopping for one of my stores, and I was in the fashion district shopping, and I got a 911 call on my beeper. So anyone, you know, present day kids don't probably even know what a beeper is, but back then a beeper was a way of communicating, and somebody would leave a number and you would return the call. But anytime someone left the phone number that you was calling with a 911, it was understood that it was an emergency. So I remember sitting in one of the showrooms, and I received the call, and it was a 911 call, and I immediately got up and left to call him, and he told me he needed to talk to me. So I shot uptown, and I met him in the block. He lived on 32nd Street, and we met in a block of 131st Street between 7th and 8th, and he lived on 132nd and 7th. So he walked over, and we met, midway in the block, and he started explaining to me what he understood had happened.
Right, because ultimately what happened was that his own uncle,
Right.
along with Preacher,
Right.
had kidnapped his 12-year-old brother.
I mean, we all know that presently because
Presently.
of the information coming out, but then, no, we didn't know.
And they wanted how much? Like $500,000 or something?
Yeah, that's what it was stated to have been.
And then to show that they were serious, they actually cut off his little brother's
The very
finger.
next day.
The next
After
day.
him and I, he explained to me the very next day, right?
They cut off his little brother's finger. Darnell's finger, and sent it to him just to show they were.
Well, they didn't send it to him, but they left it in a McDonald's on Broadway in 125th Street and called his house and said there's something to go look. And he sent somebody over there, and that's what they came back with.
How much of a mess was Rich during this time?
I mean, oddly enough, I mean, he of course, but he was dealing with it. And some of the conversations that we were having was, okay, well, this is real and we need to figure out at this point, because this happened so fast. I mean, from one day to the next day. So there was discussions of, well, how do you even pay a ransom to somebody who just did what they did? How do you trust whomever?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of logistics that you had to make heads or tails out of, So there was discussions about, maybe we can put a bunch of money mixed with singles and whatever, But again, I don't think it was so much as it was about the money as it was how do you do this? Like, it wasn't just a conversation with him speaking to his little brother. They had already cut his little brother's finger off.
Yeah.
So you have to understand, like, again, and we're talking, I'm 22, and he's maybe 21, 22 at the time. So, present day in 2020, people reflect on what they would do, how they would do it. Next time you in a room with a 22-year-old, have a conversation with them, and then try to in turn imagine negotiating the return of an individual that's been abducted and kidnapped.
Did the FBI ever get involved in this?
They did get involved. Shortly after the finger was brought to the house, because his sister, again, was even younger than him, which is Pat, Pat, his sister. And she sort of just lost it, and ran out the house, and the law had got involved after that.
Okay. But his brother was never returned. They actually ended up killing him.
They did.
They dumped the body somewhere?
In City Island. City Island is a part of the Bronx.
Okay.
Actually not far from where Rich actually ended up.
Yeah. Okay. How did Rich react to his brother getting killed?
I don't think words could describe it, but he wasn't an emotional wreck. Like he was dealing with what, he was trying to get his brother back. Even after that, he was still trying to get his brother back. Like, this didn't end when the police got involved, because the police actually picked him up, and they interviewed him, and he wouldn't say anything to him.
Oh, he wasn't cooperating?
No, he didn't cooperate.
Because he had his own things going on.
Absolutely. But even still, it just was where we were at the time, and out, what we was doing.
Ultimately, they caught the guys who did it. Eventually.
After, years later.
Years later.
Years later, yeah.
When you found out it was the uncle, how did you feel? Did you know his uncle?
Yeah, I knew him. But again,
what a piece of shit of a human being, man.
Absolutely.
I can't. I don't think there's words to describe someone that would kidnap their own nephew, cut their finger off, and kill him for some money. Like,
they say it's always the person closest to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at one point, Rich Porter gets killed. How long after the whole incident with his brother does he get killed?
Maybe a month.
Oh, that quick?
Yeah, about a month. This thing happened to Donnell sometime in December, and then Rich ended up getting killed sometime in January of the following year.
Okay. So you and Alpo were actually close the whole time?
Right.
Okay. But you weren't actually doing drug deals with Alpo?
No, he was dealing with Rich.
He was dealing with Rich.
Right.
So you kind of like left those,
I mean, it's just what it was. They all was from Harlem. Like I said, they all came up
logistics
together.
Of it.
Right.
Okay. But after after Rich died, Alpo started to approach you
Right.
for work.
Right.
Did you have any idea that Alpo was responsible for killing Rich Porter?
You know, it was some rumors about it, but because of what I believed their relationship to have been, it just didn't make sense to me because of what I thought the relationship represented.
Right. So Alpo actually approached you for a $400,000 drug deal.
Well, we did multiple deals. I
So
mean,
that
it wasn't
was
one time. That was we
right,
just
but
we
he was
did
doing
business.
deals of that caliber.
That's funny.
With you.
Well, yeah, with me.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Well, you said it's funny?
Yeah, it's funny to me because the way that me and Rich ended up partnered up was because Rich was complaining about his relationships with certain individuals that he was doing business with, because Rich was doing consignment with people, and consignment is self-explanatory. So what he said to me, and this is how we ended up partnering up during the time, is because he was telling me how he would do consignment with people, and they would owe him money. So when it was time for him to make a move, he would have to chase people for his money a certain kind of way. So it always held him up a certain kind of how. And it's almost like if he didn't have work to give him, then he had to run behind him. So he's really never fully paid. So if somebody owes you, let's use a round number, 200,000, and you in turn go give them another 10 keys at 200,000, you're never really, you're never really just seeing your money to actually do something with it. So he was saying there's times when his connect might have not been on, and he's chasing them for his money.
Right.
You know.
Right. I guess there was a guy in Harlem named Fritz, the consignment king.
Yeah, that's
had like 20 or 30 million on consignment at any given time.
Yeah, there's rumors to have been that, and I can believe it to be true.
Okay. Well, Alpo ended up pleading guilty to killing 14 people.
Right.
That's just who he admitted to.
Right.
You actually compared him to Ted Bundy.
And again, this is my understanding as I evolved and understood, because he's a real likable guy. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, like, and a lot of people who know Alpo, we know him from Harlem. The person that he turned out to be is not the person that I was friends with. You know what I'm saying? I understand how the game goes, you know, the give and take with that. But the person who he ultimately became when he went to D.C. was not the guy that was the beloved guy in Harlem.
Right, because then he got mixed up with Wayne Perry over there. Right. And yeah, I mean, he basically would just kill people he owed money to. Well,
ultimately, that's what it became, and that may have happened with the instance of Rich. He may have, like, something might have happened and triggered a thought in his mind, like, you know, hey, this is a lot easier, you know.
Yeah, I don't have to pay him back if he's not there to pick it up.
Right.
And Rich actually paid you the night he got killed.
He did.
So you were brought in for questioning and everything else.
Well,
like
no, the feds came to my store. They beat me, and I went to return the call. And it was the police on the other line, and I hung up the phone. And maybe a day or two after that, they ended up just walking into my store. Yeah. You know, in regards to, you know, our communication.
You had a friend that was on the run for murder.
Right.
And he had a 19-year-old girlfriend.
Right.
Can you describe what happened with her?
Well, he was more than a friend. He was like my partner. He was somebody who I had a lot of respect for and held in a certain regard. We were partners, you know.
What was his name?
His name was Crusader. That's what they known in the street. Right. His name was Crusader. So he was a very good friend of mine. Like, you know, we all was in D.C. together, and he had a girlfriend, right? That again, she was a teenager, you know. And as I understand the story, she was in the Bronx, visiting one of her friends, and she was abducted by 3 guys with guns.
Right, she was coming out of her apartment.
She was
3
coming out
guys
of
with
her apartment.
guns basically kidnapped her.
Right, and they took her to the roof, and they threatened to kill her, and, you know, those kind of things, and told her for her to take them somewhere to get some money. You know, they wanted money or whatever. Right. You know, ultimately she ended up bringing them to my mother's house.
Right, along with another girl as well.
Yeah, she was with the girl who she was going to visit.
Yeah. Yeah,
they ended up at my mother's house, which coincidentally, and I've been trying to make sense of this from then to now. Where this happened at was up in the Bronx on Andrews Avenue, and where my mother lived was maybe 10 minutes from there to there. So that may have had something to do with her thinking. You know, I'm not quite sure, but when I try to make it make sense, again, I'm a grown man now, so when I reflect back on it, again, here's a girl who's 18, 19 years old, if that at the time, and you got 3 guys abducted and they got guns, so I guess she panicked and.
Because she assumed it's your mother, there's probably a bunch of your money at your mother's house?
You know, that I'm unclear as to what that conversation was between her and them. When I had to think about it, I just assumed that, you know, she knew that maybe she probably was trying to buy time, hoping that in the course of going from point A to point B, something would happen and this would get disrupted.
Okay, so these 3 men show up at your mother's house with these 2 young girls.
Right.
Your mother doesn't have any money.
No, I
She
didn't
doesn't
keep
have
any
any drugs.
Nothing. She works at the bank. She's a bank manager.
She's a regular 9-to-5.
That's what she is.
Worker.
Out the way.
How old was she? In her 50s or 60s?
No, she wasn't that old.
40s?
Yeah, she's a young mother. My mother had me when she was 19.
Okay. This young mother, 40-something years old. These 3 men burst into her house.
Right.
And she can't give them anything.
Right.
They ended up shooting everyone in the house.
They did.
Your mother dies.
It's her along with the girl that was being visited.
Yeah. And one girl actually survives.
Right. My guy's girl.
Oh, the actual girl that they kidnapped.
Right.
She survives.
Right.
I guess you're at the movie theater when you get a 911 page.
I am at the movie theater. I'm actually at Secaucus, just like with some of my guys and a few girls. We're hanging out. And I actually bumped into Rich that same night as well, because he lived out in Secaucus. And we all at the movie theater. When I get, again, another 911 page from a number I didn't recognize. So when I answer the phone, when I call the number back, there's a girl on the phone who I don't even know who she is, but she's trying to tell me something happened. So my first inkling was that this was some bullshit, that somebody was trying to, you know, like get me somewhere to potentially do something to me. But I was frantically calling the house, nobody was answering, you know, doing that kind of thing. So I immediately jumped into my car to shoot to where this, you know, the incident had occurred in the Bronx.
You show up and there's police tape everywhere.
Right.
And then they tell you your mother's been killed.
Yeah. And only one person survived, and that she was taken to the hospital.
What went through your mind at that point?
I couldn't make heads or tails of it because my mother didn't hang out with this girl. You know, she may have knew who she was because my mother would come to the store and do the books around the store. So she was acquainted with my friends and people associated with them. So, but they didn't hang out. There was no reason like that I could identify or relate to why she was at my house or my mother's house. So I was just trying to make heads or tails of that, which, you know, I just couldn't because it just didn't make any sense.
Well, the girl survives.
Right.
So she gets taken to the hospital.
Right.
She got shot in the head or something.
Right. She got shot in the head. Right.
But she actually makes it through. So the police question her.
Right.
What did she tell them?
I'm not sure exactly what she told them. I know what she told us.
Aha. What did she tell you?
Pretty much where it happened at, and she didn't know who the individual was, but all she had to do was tell us the block that it happened on. And before the sun came up, we sort of knew what happened.
Did she ever explain to you why she took these men to your mother's house? Did you ask her? Because I'm sure that's one of your questions.
Well, initially when this happened, I couldn't even bring myself to have a conversation with her, but her guy is my guy, meaning this is somebody who would, you know, die for me and I would die for him. Yeah. So this just wasn't a casual acquaintance, like, you know, I had so much love and respect for him and vice versa that, you know, it just like any information that was funneled through would have came through him. And it even made it difficult for him and I to converse because of, you know.
I mean, that's your friend, but this is your mother.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't really compare the two.
Right, and I'm not trying to compare the two. What I'm stating to you is like me and this person went to war together, meaning like I've had my life in his hand and he's had my, my life in his hands.
But not this girl though.
But not, right, and that was his woman. So, you know.
I see the complexity.
So me trying to go around him to her is, you know what I mean? It just was
bad situation.
It was a very complex situation.
Was she cooperating with the police?
I have to assume she did because eventually They ended up catching the individuals a couple of years later.
So the 3 guys that did it were caught.
Well, 2 of them, one of the guys got killed in the process through the time that they were being sought after.
She didn't shed too many tears over that.
No, why would I?
Right. Good riddance.
Pretty much.
When you found out about the guys who killed your mother, did you know them at all?
Never met them, never saw them.
Never met them, never saw them.
Didn't know what they looked like.
What were they sentenced to?
I don't know. Some ridiculous amount of time.
Are they still in prison now?
Yeah, they're in prison now.
Did that bring any level of closure to you, or did you want to get to them yourself?
We look for them every day. I mean, and this is just me being frank. You know, for me to say anything other than that wouldn't be true. I spent every waking moment trying to track them down. You know, I mean, that's one of those things I'd have did and got convicted and did the time and lived with myself.
I think a lot of people would.
Right. So it wasn't a
Nothing to be
choice.
ashamed of.
But no, it's not. The thing is, and they knew how strong we were. So kidnapping these 3 women and not getting anything other than whatever jewelry that she may have had on in her car, they knew what the violation was. And I have to believe that that's the reason why you take an abduction, a home invasion, and turn it into almost a triple homicide, because they was concerned about the consequences of what they had done.
Because I guess they thought since they killed everyone, they were just going to walk away.
There's no way for us to know who did it,
right.
And there wouldn't have been.
But then one girl survived,
Exactly.
and then that kind
And
of.
then they went on the run.
Yeah.
They was actually apprehended in like Boston and Chicago or something like that.
Okay.
They couldn't have stayed in New York City.
So did it bring any closure knowing that they're still in prison?
No, I live with that to this day because I feel it's because of me that it happened, because of my lifestyle. You know, so no, it doesn't give me any satisfaction. And even if I would have killed them at my hands, it wouldn't have gave me any satisfaction because my mother was still going, nothing was going to bring her back.
Yeah. Sorry for your loss, man.
Yeah, thank you.
So the feds was on to you. They did a 3-year investigation
Yes,
on your organization.
right.
They said that you were the biggest drug dealer in Harlem since Nicky Barnes.
That's the way the newspaper read.
Yes.
Right,
And they also claimed that you made $40 million in drug sales.
right.
You got picked up.
Yeah, this is in late 94, yes.
94. 22 other people got picked up as well.
Right, myself and 21 other people.
21 others, sorry.
Total of 22.
Total of 22. You were charged with CCE, which is a continuing criminal enterprise,
Yes.
which is the equivalent of kingpin charge? Or that's something different?
No, it's the highest drug charge you can get.
Right.
It's a natural life sentence.
So, along with you being charged as a kingpin, there's 21 other people, and that includes your kids' mothers.
Yeah,
There's 2 of them, I guess?
was one.
1.
Right.
Okay. And your aunts
Yeah.
and a bunch of your friends and
No, my cousins, just my
Your
family.
cousins.
Yeah, my immediate family for the most part. Anybody who was related or associated to me in a personal way, they was arrested.
right.
Mm.
So now everyone is now being charged and is locked up, and
Right.
they're trying to get everyone to turn against each other.
Fact.
But out of all those people, nobody actually told.
Nobody.
What kind of time were they threatening everyone else with?
Well, a drug conspiracy, a 846, carries a mandatory minimum of 10 years at the very least. And then all depending on what they was able to prove, it would be anywhere from 10 years on. 10 years of life.
Okay. And you were facing life.
Several charges that
Yeah.
were, if I got convicted of any one of them, I was looking at life.
You were 27 years old at the time,
Turning 28 in 5 days.
and they were offering you a 25-year plea deal.
At some point.
Yeah. So they're like, you can get out at 52,
Right.
but you weren't trying to hear that.
I couldn't, you know, I couldn't relate to that.
Well, you're in jail,
Right.
and you actually described it in your book as a sense of relief. You felt like you were getting off the hamster wheel.
Early on.
Yeah.
Like I was probably able to hear myself think for the first time, like in years.
Right. You've got a bunch of money,
Right.
but the feds start seizing your bank accounts.
Freezing all my assets.
They put a lien on your house. You got to lose your house at one point.
Yeah, at one point.
They seize your father's condo.
Yep.
They start taking all your cars and his cars and
Businesses,
everyone's cars,
everything.
businesses, and everything.
Right.
Now, you have your kid's mother, you have your aunts, you have your cousins. All these people are tied into your situation.
Well, honestly, they weren't.
What the feds were trying to paint it as that.
Right, right. Well, what they were doing was really holding them hostage, hoping that, because,
Yeah.
let me back up a little bit. I saw early on when they were investigating me, early on, I started being followed and I noticed something was going on. And mind you, I had a run at that point for 7, 8 years. So it wasn't odd to me when I looked up and they were on me, a certain kind of how. So literally the first day I saw myself being followed, I closed shop. I sort of stopped, damn near in that very instant, trying to figure out what was going on. So in the process of that, I went and contacted my accountant and tried to say, hey, I don't know where I am with anything, but I want to get brought up to speed because something's going on and it's not really, whatever.
So you knew that the feds were basically closing in. Okay.
And not only did I see them day one, I had a lot of resources and I had received phone calls from certain people that was in law enforcement telling me, gave me heads up.
You didn't want to leave the country at that point? Go to somewhere where there was no extradition?
Well, I didn't know what was going on. And what made me not even think like that right out the gate was that this thing went on for 3 years. And I'm talking about literally 3 years of me walking a straight line. So the more I walked the straight line and the more that I continued to see them, it started making me think maybe I had a tax problem. And I figured I could deal with that, so I didn't overly panic because it just went on and on. At first, when you first see it, you really disturbed by it because you think tomorrow they're gonna kick in your door. Then this went on and on and on for several years.
Yeah, so it just became normal.
Right, it just became normal, right.
And I mentioned the whole thing with the family because I just interviewed this guy, Anthony Jeezy Gonzalez. He was the manager for the Clips.
Oh yeah, I know who it is.
Yeah.
Right.
And we just did his first interview ever. It's going to start running this weekend.
Okay.
And he was picked up for running a $20 million drug operation.
I remember that when that happened. I was actually in Virginia.
Aha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I got some friends down there.
2010.
Yeah, I got some friends down there.
And they had also arrested his mother.
Right.
They arrested his kid's mother. They arrested his family members and so forth. And in order to protect his family, he signed an immunity deal.
Right.
To essentially cooperate
Right.
in exchange for them letting his whole family go.
That's what they was hoping to happen with me.
Yeah, and during the course of the interview, we talked about this. I mean, he admitted to what he did. He said that he did cooperate.
Right.
And he said that, he really looks at some of the, his co-prisoners. He's like, a lot of them he feels are just stronger than him because they were able to not cooperate and have their mother locked up for 20 years
Right.
and kind of hold on to this code of theirs while their mother is rotting in prison. And he's
Right.
like, he just couldn't do that himself. He
Right.
had to break down and break his own codes
Right.
in order to save his family.
When I went to prison, I had it easy in prison because once you get to these different prisons, and I ain't started at no camp, I started at some really tough spots. You got to show your paperwork. So when I go show my paperwork and it explains about such and such, and they look at it like in prison, that's how they looked at it. When they see it and say, okay, you got a Mexican guy who told on you, and you told on this other Mexican guy because he didn't want to tell on the Mexican guy, but then you did that so your family wouldn't go to prison. Oh man, but then when you put that in your mind on what will you do, they're looking at it like, man, that's a tough pill. Now you got people who gonna say, oh man, because I had people say this in prison, but you shouldn't have had your family involved in it. But like I told them, my family wasn't involved in it. That's what the feds do. So, you know what I mean? But you got to put yourself in that situation. So you can't say what you're going to do until you get put in that situation.
But you weren't actually willing to do that.
Well, this is the distinction between his situation and mine. My family didn't sell narcotics with me. That's the first thing.
Well, his family didn't really sell narcotics,
Well,
but
see-
there was a gray area where, like, his mother, when he was out of town, his mother would drop off the money, and his
some of those things were similar
baby's
to
mother
mine as
was
well.
cashing, cashier's checks were technically drug money. So,
Right.
if there's $1 connected to a drug operation, they can get you in a RICO.
Well, the same thing applies with me, but they just weren't a part of my organization. I sort of kept them over there. Now they benefit obviously from my profits.
Yeah.
I took care of them. I mean, I'm sure they had an idea as to what I was doing, but the guys that I did all of these crazy things with, when I got arrested, they weren't in the bullpen with me.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that indicated that something ain't right here. They don't know what they should know. So it gave me the understanding that this isn't what it is. Like, they're using my family to pretty much do what you stated.
Yeah.
And because I had faith in knowing, like, again, a lot of this was my bravado, a lot of it was my ignorance.
Right, because at the end of the day, all that shit that you're thinking about really doesn't matter.
Yeah, but
if
you know
if the feds want to paint the story a certain type of way, and if the jury wants, goes
agree.
along with
I agree.
how the feds paint it with their 97% conviction rate, your whole family could have gone to prison. That could have been the end of the day.
I agree.
The end of it.
But for me, and most Americans, when we think about the feds, we think they are the barometer of truth.
Right.
Is what you want to believe. This is what they disseminate to the public.
Right.
So for me, I needed to know what this looks like when you go to a jury, and like, where the pictures, where the phone calls, where the wiretaps, where the drug transactions. These people didn't do any of this.
Okay.
So I just couldn't wrap my hands around the concept of, and again, that was the card that they played. Okay. I just didn't go for it.
So let me ask you a question. If you could answer it honestly.
Absolutely.
If ultimately it was 100% sure that if you do not cooperate with them, your kid's mother, your aunts, your cousins are all going to prison for substantial periods of time, would you still not cooperate?
It's just not in me, Vlad.
Okay. So you would let them go to prison right along with you?
It's not, you know what? It wouldn't be that I would let them go to prison along with me. But if they was a part of the crimes that I committed and they was wrong, then I guess at this point we would all have to pay for the consequences of our actions.
I got it.
But since they were innocent,
I
didn't feel that. I would have had a conversation with them and say, hey, we all did wrong. We broke the law.
Right.
This is what come with it.
Yeah.
This is part of the other side of that coin. But that just wasn't the case.
Okay, I understand.
But telling is just not something that I've ever.
Okay, so you had a friend named Charles Allen Brown.
Right.
From Mount Vernon.
Right.
Who was hustling with you.
Right. At some point.
At some point. You gave him cars.
Well, for clarity, this guy Charles Allen Brown actually used to work with Azie, and he was part of that other group that I described earlier.
Got it.
But he went to jail, and then when he went to jail, he had a good name at the time. So when he came back home, the way the drug game works is like, if somebody come from jail and you sort of in a position to help them, you do. That's sort of like a part of the ideals of what it is. You put somebody on, that's what it's called. You look out, you try to get them back on their feet.
Because they went to jail without telling on anybody.
Right, and they had a good name, so when they come home.
That's what you mean by a good name.
Right.
They kept their mouth shut.
Right.
So he got out, you helped him out.
Right.
Oh, I guess you said you saved his life a couple times?
I did.
Over what?
There was an instance where he came to me and he wanted he said he had a customer that wanted to buy 3 keys of crack. This is not long after they had enacted that legislation in like '87 where crack was 100 keys to 1 key of powder of cocaine.
Yeah.
And so when he came to me and he said that he had someone that wanted to buy 3 keys of crack, it seemed a little odd to me.
So he wanted already cracked up.
Right. So I was
Does anyone ever buy? I've never even heard of that.
Well, there were people, but it's very rare. Most people wanted to buy it and do whatever they wanted to do with it.
Buy the kilo of cocaine
and do it themselves. Right,
10
whatever,
kilos of crack.
whatever,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But it just seemed odd to me. But for him, they was willing to overpay, whereas if a kilo was 20,000, they was willing to pay 27,000 in New York. And it's just like, this doesn't sound right to me. It just doesn't make no sense to me. But anyway, for him, he was looking at making anywhere from 15,000 to 21,000, all depending on what he sold it for, and like literally handing from getting it to handing it off to somebody, and that's an easy lick. So, but I just told him it didn't make sense to me. So I said, well, since it's your customer, then tell them, leave somebody sitting with them, take the money, you come get it, you take it back to them, and you do it like that. But no one's gonna turn this coke to crack and then and then if they don't want it, what do you do with this? Like, that kind of thing. Right. But anyway, I convinced him that it wasn't, something about it didn't make sense. He in turn went and found somebody else that he attempted to do it with. They wasn't able to do it, but the person who ended up trying to do it with them ended up getting busted. So I remember him coming back to me saying, like, thanking me, like, damn, Kev, I'm glad, this, that, and the third, and so on and so forth. So that was one instance. There was another instance where he was dealing with somebody that was dealing with one of these notorious crews. And they took it as a slight because this person that he was dealing with, they were making money off of this individual. And when he cut into that individual, they no longer was making money off of that individual, so they took that personal. They found out who he was and knew that he was down with me, and I got a phone call that was like, your guy out of respect for you, Kev, I'm calling you, but your guy has a problem because we're eating off of this person, and he's got in between that, and he's taking the business somewhere else, and we're not taking kind to that. And I assured them that I would have a conversation with him and get him out the middle of that, and I did that. The other individual ultimately got killed.
So 22 of you are now tied into this whole continuing criminal enterprise
Right.
Charge. Everyone gets arrested except for Charles Allen Brown,
Right.
who goes on the run.
Right.
And that lasts for a good 6 months.
Right.
And then he gets caught.
Right.
And what happens as soon as they put the handcuffs on him?
He gets to talking to the traffic agents, damn near. That's what they was equivalent to, just local officers in Raleigh, North Carolina, not the feds, just the people who he had a warrant, they caught him. And I'm not making this up for the sake of trying to humiliate the person. This is a fact. In my discovery, it states that as soon as he got caught, local law enforcement, he was talking with them.
So somebody broke ranks.
He did.
One guy.
One guy.
Had he not talked, do you think he could have walked away?
Absolutely. Because the day I got arrested, they found guns in every house that I lived in. I could live with that. That's not what I didn't have a felony. So anybody who knows anything about the feds, they don't arrest you. If you don't have a felony, there's no charge. If you get caught with a gun and you're a felon, it's called a felon in possession. But because I wasn't a felony.
Right. Because up to this point, you weren't really being arrested. You were not a convicted drug dealer.
Right. And for more clarity, when we talk about my family, what also lent to how I proceeded was the fact that when they went for arraignment, they all got released immediately. Like the prosecutor didn't even have an argument to keep them in prison. So that was an indicator to me too that this case wasn't what it was. So that helped me make my decision as well.
How did you feel when you found out Charles was cooperating?
When they caught him, they brought him back to New York City. And this is the first time I would see him since he had been on the run. And we all in the bullpen. And I swear to you, there was nothing about him that gave me, he told. I knew all the things that I had done to him, done for him. And all of my co-defendants were saying, he gonna tell. And I was probably the only one that had faith in that he wouldn't, because I knew all the things that I had did for him. And I was hoping that I had did enough that would make him feel, that I need to stand with y'all, because up until this point, no one told. And this was part of the conversation that him and I had. It wasn't until we left the bullpen and I got back to the building and I was talking to the marshals and the people and receiving a discharge, because I had knew my way around the building at this point and I had earned favors. So I was trying to get him to come to my floor, to get them to assign him to my floor so I could bring him up to speed as to where we were with the case. So when we left the bullpen, I told him, listen, I'm gonna get you brought to my floor. So when I'm in my housing unit, about an hour goes by, and he doesn't come up. You know, I go to the correction officer and I ask him, you know, could you do me a favor and see what's going on with this guy? When he came back with the information, I knew he was bad.
Okay. So you get offered this 25-year plea deal,
Right.
and you decide to fight it.
Right.
Now, when you have plea deals before trial, the feds have all this paperwork, but they can basically black out all the names.
It's indicted.
Indicted.
Right.
So you don't know who said this.
Right.
You don't know
You don't. Well,
any of the names.
Well, you have an idea.
You have an idea, but
you don't know.
Really don't know because there's
right.
a black line that's going through certain parts of that
Right.
Of that document. And since most people take plea deals,
You never get to know.
you never get to know, and people could
fact.
basically tell on you,
And you'll be none the wiser.
And they walk away with no repercussions,
Right.
And they get to
Well, that typically
less of
happens
their
in federal
time and so
cases.
forth. Exactly. Most people don't take it to trial.
That's a fact. 97% conviction rate, right?
Exactly. Yeah, why would you go up against that? Yeah, I remember I interviewed Chris Gotti, and Irv Gotti for that matter, and we just talked about how when they beat the feds, it was like it's like a unicorn situation where it was like, yo, like no one expected this.
That's a fact.
But they beat the feds. It cost them $1 million. They lost their record label, but they won.
They did.
But that never happens.
Right. It's true.
So you decide to go to trial.
Right.
And at that point, they actually give you the real documents.
Yeah, as the discovery, as the process goes on, the discovery is given to you, so that the stuff that's blacked out,
yeah,
you start seeing it.
In the paperwork, you said that Alpo was actually cooperating in your case.
Right.
You also said that Azie was cooperating in your case.
Well, the Azie thing is a little different because I don't understand that when I see his name there. You know, Alpo was already arrested. And it was understood what he was doing by this time. You know, he was arrested in like 91. And by the time I went to jail, it was understood what was going on with him. So me seeing that didn't surprise me. But me seeing Azie's name in there didn't make sense to me. Because he wasn't arrested, he was a free man.
Right. Now, you did the interview with Flex.
Right.
And you mentioned the Azie thing.
Right.
Azie, who I know, I've interviewed before.
Okay.
I've never had a conversation with him about this,
okay.
But he publicly spoke out and he said that what you said was a lie. He claimed he never knew you, and that he said if what you said was true, he wanted to give rocks to his children and let his children stone him to death.
Okay.
What do you say to that?
I've already proved that he knows me. I mean, he knows me. Let me go, Vlad. Azie wrote a book that precedes all of this.
Right. That's the movie Paid in Full was based off that book.
No.
No, it's another book.
Paid in Full came first. He made a book. He has a book called Game Over.
Game Over came first.
Well, that was a title, but the book is called that.
Okay.
But the book came years later. The book came in the 2000s.
Okay.
But in any event, this individual who states he doesn't know me, there's 2 chapters devoted to me in the book for somebody you don't know.
Okay.
So, you know, let him explain that to you next time y'all speak. Because, again, you don't know me. Well, why are you writing about me in your book?
Okay. So you have your first trial.
Right.
Well, if Azie and Alpo are in the paperwork, why aren't they forced to take the stand?
Okay. Here's the explanation for that.
Because I just want to, preface this for people who don't know.
Okay. No, and that's fine. And I'm glad that you're doing that.
Yeah. If you make a statement against somebody,
right.
You then have to about somebody, and it goes to trial.
Right.
You are the defendant can legally put that person on the stand and cross-examine them.
No.
That's not true?
Not true. No, that's not true.
People can make statements without actually having to take the stand.
It's in your discovery. You know, you get it in your when you first get arrested, you get a complaint, right? And even with the discovery, the government gets to choose who they call as a witness. You can call them to counter that, but it's not in my benefit to do any of that. You, as a defendant, that's why you call a defendant, you're paying defense, meaning.
Well, wouldn't you want to call someone to the stand that's making a statement about you that could potentially send you to life in prison?
No, not in that instance, because what happened is, the reason why, to be more specific, and this is my belief because of like you said, Alpo at the time had been convicted of like 13, 14 murders.
Yeah.
Him coming in my trial with me sitting there with my wife, my this or that, who low-level drug dealers at the best. Him getting on the stand saying all these things about me is almost like the devil calling a saint a liar. It's like he hurts the government case. Now, had I been in there for 20 murders as well, then the government's theory would be it takes a bad guy to catch a bad guy, you know, but...
Well, but isn't, you know, you could put him on the stand and say...
He bought drugs from me?
Well, you could say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here's a guy who's facing a bunch of murders. He's going to say whatever it takes
exactly.
to lower his
absolutely.
charges and to walk away. So he's making up all this stuff about my client,
right.
you know.
And it's believable in that instance.
Yeah.
So that's why they didn't do it.
That wouldn't have helped you?
No, that wouldn't have helped me because the fact that they didn't bring him, it's like the less the jury hear about you, the better.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So I don't need to bring in somebody to argue whether or not I sold drugs with them.
Okay.
The less is best for me.
Okay, same thing with Azie then. You didn't want Azie as a witness?
No, Azie's situation is to the contrary, is different. Because to this day, that situation just still doesn't make sense to me. Because him being in my discovery, my early discovery, like, you know, everything's dated. So I'm getting stuff, I get in jail, it's almost 95, it's November 94, a month from 95. In my early discovery during the investigation, I'm seeing dates of 92, 91. This is when I'm still in the street. This is when he's in the street. But his name is appearing on the documentation at the header, you know, and filing evidence and things that happened through the course of the investigation. And then as my prosecution evolves, then his name is removed from it. Initially, it didn't make sense, and it wasn't a big deal to me because I know I never did no business with him, so I wasn't overly concerned about that.
So you never sold drugs with Azie?
Never.
Never. Okay.
So that's why I didn't really make heads or tails of it.
Yeah. Well, you go to trial.
Right.
And how long was the first trial?
About 4.5 months.
4.5 months.
Right.
Well, you're facing life in prison. You want to...
Right. I'm going over everything.
You're going over everything.
Absolutely.
After 4.5 months, everyone rests their case.
Right.
And the jury goes to deliberate.
Right.
How long did they deliberate for?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, they argued with each other.
Right.
And they came back as a hung jury.
The judge finally declared it a hung jury after note after note. He went in and gave the instruction again, and that told them to go back and try to work it out, and they just couldn't come to a decision.
So basically, these 12 people cannot come to a unanimous decision of guilty or not guilty.
Right.
So you go back to jail again.
Right. Never left jail. I'm in jail.
You're still in jail, right? I mean, you leave court, go back to jail.
Mm-hmm.
What is going through your head as they finish the trial? And did you feel good about the first trial or no?
Oh, I felt great about it because this is pretty much what I knew it to be.
Yeah.
And it gave me confidence because I'm like, well, the government they presented their case to jurors. And the jurors obviously saw some part of whatever we, as a defendant, put on the defense. They couldn't come to terms with a conclusion.
Right, but you're sitting here for 2 weeks going, if they come back with guilty,
my life's over. My life's over.
Life in prison as a 27-year-old.
Right.
I'm going away forever. I'll never get to really touch another woman. I'll never get to spend money. I'm now in a cage with a bunch of men for the rest of my life.
That's a fact.
But they came back with a hung jury.
They did.
So the feds decided to
retry you. Right.
So now you're in trial number 2.
But before I get to trial number 2, they come to conclusions with the other 21 people. Most got time served. Some got a year or 2 at the most. Okay. I think the most someone got was 3-4 years.
So here comes trial number 2.
Right.
How long did that trial last?
About 6 weeks.
So it was faster this time.
Yeah, they didn't have 21 other people that they had to.
Okay, right. And the feds saw what not to do this time around and so forth.
Right.
So then they conclude this trial. How long was the deliberation?
About a week.
About a week this time.
About a week.
with the same outcome.
Same outcome.
Hung jury.
Hung jury.
You've now been in jail for 2 years.
A little
during
over
this
2
process.
years, yeah.
Over 2 years. You spent $200,000 on lawyers.
Spent way more than that.
Way more than that? How much you spent?
I don't know if I had to say it. Well, this is what happened as well. You know, they confiscated a bunch of my money.
Yeah.
And there's a motion, it's called Monsanto's, who was actually a guy from Harlem. And what the case law basically says is that any monies that was taken from me, I could use toward legal defense. And you know, so you know, it's my money, and I'd rather spend it on fighting for my. So anyway, I filed that motion, and they had to relinquish some parts of my money
So
to pay my legal fees.
You're basically spending your drug money on your lawyer.
I'm spending my drug money on my freedom,
your
in
freedom.
hopes of my freedom.
Exactly.
Right.
So now, trial number 2 is a hung jury once again.
Right.
Were you expecting to win this time around? Or?
I absolutely expected to win.
And then once again, you're
Well,
back.
a lot of things happened between my first trial. One of their main witnesses basically got on the stand and said everything that the government said about me wasn't true. And that was a key witness for the government. So in the second trial, they didn't even bring him back because they considered him a hostile witness. But
Could you have brought him back?
It wouldn't have been favorable to me again, because what my lawyers told me in regards to that, you never want to put somebody on the stand that you don't know what they're going to actually say.
Right. This is Don't Worry Murray?
Right.
The lawyer?
Well, no, my lawyer was a lawyer named Anthony Rico. You know, Murray Richmond earlier, my first trial helped a lot of my family members, but not in my second trial.
Okay. So once again, hung jury.
Right.
You're not fully trusting your lawyer when your lawyer is telling you to take a plea deal and everything else like that. Because after essentially losing the second trial, the feds now take their 25-year plea deal and lower it to 10 years.
Well, no. The judge advises the prosecutor, along with my attorney, that we need to try to come to some sort of like, I guess, a deal that would work for the better sense of all that's at play.
Right. And during both trials, Charles took the stand?
Yes, both trials.
How did it feel to see him on the stand telling on you?
It really bothered me. It definitely really bothered me, because we actually had an exchange in the bullpen, him and I. Because one day they was bringing him down to trial, and they was bringing us down. And this isn't my first trial. He was bringing us down. We bumped into each other. I mean, we all handcuffed, so it wasn't a whole lot, whatever. But in any event, they ended up putting us in separate bullpens, but we could hear one another talk. So I was talking to him, and I was like, I don't like how are you doing what you're doing to me? Like all I did for you, your family, like how and then. What bothered me more so than him telling on me is the fact that he sat there and told on women that he knew had nothing to do with nothing. Like, when you're in the street, you see somebody and they present a certain kind of how, and you buy that. You see this person who's standing tall and talking shit, and so you sort of you buy into that, and then you're sitting there at the defense table, and then you see somebody on the stand not only telling on me, but then pointing fingers and making up things about people that wasn't so. I never saw that, and I never saw it in a person, let alone him.
Well, what was his answer to you when you asked him that?
He said, Kev, I got life parole in the state, and now I'm looking at life over here. And it was just, I guess for him, it's just about self-preservation.
Him or me.
That's it. That's what it came to.
Okay. So the judge brings you into his quarters.
Well, yeah.
And he basically tells you should take this 10-year plea deal.
What happened was my lawyer was trying to convince me, giving me great legal advice. I mean, in hindsight, obviously, I can make heads or tails of it. But at the time, he was telling me that, he was explaining to me pretty much how, Kevin, I've been doing this for a very long time. And you only got one time to lose. Like, the government has resources that's limited.
Do you think the feds would have kept retrying you over and over again?
It's ironic because at the time when this was when my case was going on, Snoop Dogg had just got acquitted of his situation. I think he had a hung jury too, but they didn't retry him. Or one person got convicted, and then I think he got acquitted. I don't remember what happened, but I just remember the O.J. Simpson thing was going on.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking like the stars and the moon is lining up. Like it's my time equally just to be acquitted. Because you got to figure, now I've had 2 hung juries. In the first case, the main witness isn't there. We pretty much know what their case is and how they're presented.
Right.
You know,
there's no more surprises.
There's no more surprises.
Yeah.
So I felt pretty confident. And again, mind you, I had never done this much time in my life. You know, this was my first felony. Prior to this, I had probably been arrested on some nonsense and was in and out of jail.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the longest time I had been in jail. And I wanted to go the fuck home. You know, I wanted to go home. You know, so, and 10 years sound like a long time for somebody who just didn't do time.
Yeah.
And it is a long time.
Yeah.
But in the federal system, it's a blessing. Guys will tell you, I take 10 years all day long and go lay down and again, but you know, this is what I had come to understand. But at the time, you tell me 10 years, I was impatient. I didn't want to do 10 minutes.
But you ultimately took the 10 years.
Yeah, I ultimately did, you know. And what made me take the 10 years is because, like you said, there was not a discrepancy, but there was a little mistrust with me and my lawyer at this point, although he had fought so adamantly up until that point. And even thereafter, like, you know, again, I was blessed to have hired him as an attorney. But what he was just basically explaining to me was what the system was. Like, you just don't understand. Like, you have no idea what this truly represents and the victory in this. And I just didn't really want to hear him. So the judge, I think at his request, he asked, could we have a conference?
And once the judge told you
what he said and what his mentality was, because the judge said to me, you know, Mr. Chiles, you know, you've been dignified, you know, you seem to be an intelligent guy, but what you need to understand that the charges that you're facing, no matter how much I may like you or think you don't deserve life in prison, your charge is called for that, and I'm gonna have no choice but to give you life.
Yeah.
So basically, the government can keep getting this wrong, but the one time that they get it right, my hands are gonna be tied.
It's all over for you.
Right.
Well, I guess before accepting your 10-year deal, your close friend,
My childhood
best friend,
yeah,
had taken a plea deal of 17 years.
Right. Well, they offered him the 17 years because during the course of the investigation, they had did a controlled buy with him. He also had a prior felony. So with a prior felony in the feds, they got something called an 851, where they filed that with the government, and what it does is whatever time you get, it doubles that. So he got caught with a gun, which was a consecutive 5 years. So automatically, he knew he was looking at the conspiracy carries 10 years. You double that, that's 20. He got caught with a gun, that's 25 years, like without any kind of fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So for him, as loyal as he was to me, he was like, you know, he wasn't gonna tell on me. And so he took the 17 and a half years. And he said, Kev, I have no wins. And 17 beats 25. And that's what he did.
Right. But when you accepted your 10 years, you said you would only accept it if they lowered his to 10 years as well.
Right. I couldn't live with myself, knowing what he had done for me. Because if I was in his shoes, I don't know if I could have been the man that he was. You know what I mean? When he did that, you know, like it tore me apart, because, you know, here I am fighting, and if I was to go home, I wanted him to go home. Because imagine if I got acquitted, you know, then he's sitting in jail doing 17 and a half years. That shit would have just tore me apart, knowing that he got in front of the situation for me, because he could have told and went home right out the gate.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the Bobby Schmurder case,
right,
where Bobby took more time in order for Rowdy Rebel to get less time.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, so it does happen sometimes.
No, it does, man. It does. As a matter of fact, I ended up naming my son that I had after him, because, you know, my son wouldn't be here, you know, if it wasn't for him. So I named my son after him, that son that I ended up having.
And then Charles, who took the stand against you, who was facing 25 years, got time served and walked away.
He got time served and walked away.
How'd that make you feel?
You know, my dignity's intact. My morals, my principles, the ideals that I live by. So, you know, and like I said, you know, he has to live with whatever choice he made, and I have to live with mine.
Well, you accept your plea deal.
Right.
You go and start your 10-year bid.
Right.
You have a bunch of assets that you leave with other people,
Right.
businesses,
Right.
and so forth. And I hear the story over and over again with people I interview. All of that kind of goes away.
Yeah, but you know what? And I don't know if the people that have said what they said to you, it wasn't done malicious. You know, like I was here and I was overseeing things. So when you leave a person who's not a business person in charge of a business, the business typically fails because there was never a business person in the first place. It's not like they go and squander and spend your money and then have a disregard for you. That wasn't what it was in my instance.
Okay, well, for example, I talked to Lil D and Freeway Ricky about this.
Right.
And they left money in people's names. They
Right.
left property in people's names. And when they got out, finally, the money was spent. The property was in someone else's name, and they weren't trying to give it back.
When you get all that time, you have to trust somebody. You got to let people hold money. You got to let people have your properties in their names. And majority of the guys that you will have a conversation with that did a bunch of those years, throughout those years, family and friends, they gonna spend that money, man. Because they feel like you don't need it though. Like in their mind, they say, all you need is some money to go to the commissary and get on the phone.
I don't think I overly cared so much about that, to be quite honest, because everything that I had or had was with my family. And like I said, no one my family ever done anything malicious to me. Like, you know, they have to live, life goes on. That's not something that I harbor. I didn't have that kind of feeling.
Well, Freeway Ricky, his own plug set him up.
Right.
And he got convicted to life in prison.
I'm aware of it.
He gets to prison and he's angry.
I was angry too.
You know, here's this guy, I made him millions of dollars. He been to my house, he met my family. And he was angry. He was angry at the guy.
Right.
And he said a couple years later, after sitting down in prison, he finally realized that snitching is a part of the drug game.
The way I look at it is, first of all, I made the mistake of getting in the drug business. That was my first mistake.
Mm-hmm.
My next mistake was I went back into the drug business after I said I quit.
Yeah.
So what he did is he only did what people do in the drug business. They tell. They set you up. And for somebody to go into the drug business and not understand that, which I was in the drug business and didn't understand it, but I came to grips with it.
Oh, okay.
To think that you're going to sell drugs and nobody's going to tell on you, you're just deceiving yourself. Because ultimately, everyone who gets in this game will get told on. And it was really his own fault of getting into the drug game, as opposed to someone else's fault for doing something that usually happens anyways.
Right.
Did you feel the same way?
I feel that I convinced myself that I treated people so well that they wouldn't tell on me, and I just took care of people like in a manner in which I did that. I just really believed nobody was ever going to tell on me, you know. And I'm not going to act like my theory was 100% flawed, because here I am talking to you now, and 22 people got arrested and one person told. I mean, some people consider that great percentages.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because all it takes is one person.
It do, but
You
they
see what I'm saying?
But even with that one person, his story just wasn't enough to get a conviction, because I would be looking at a life sentence, and me and you wouldn't be having this conversation.
Still got 10 years.
I did.
And that is not an insignificant amount of time.
No, it's not. But I think
Because
again,
you're how old right now?
I'm in my 50s, early
Right.
50s.
A fifth of your life was spent in a cage.
Right.
You can't just gloss that over and
No,
say,
I'm-
I only got 10 years.
Well, Val, let me say this to you.
You see what I'm saying? I mean,
I want to help you understand
Yeah.
who I am. I've been doing Don Diva for 20 years because of my own ideals and principles, and I've been supporting guys who were there when I was there and still there. You know, a lot of things that happened in my life when I was selling narcotics, you know, and I wrestle with this because I experienced some amazing things that maybe had I not sold drugs, I wouldn't have. you know, and I don't know when I have to look at it. Like it's almost if you ask somebody, how much money would I have to give you to do some time? And there are people who will say, hey, because you know what, I work for Con Edison and I make $50,000 a year, and in 10 years, that'll be equivalent to $500,000. But after taxes, is this. And if you tell that same person, I'll give you $10 million if you do 10 years. There are people who could rationalize that and say, you know what, I'm gonna spend this 10 years, which is not guaranteed you're gonna survive because we don't control our lifespan. But there are some people who can rationalize that and say, you know what, the trade-off's worth it.
But you didn't have money waiting for you. You didn't have
no. This is me. This is me looking back in hindsight.
I see what you're saying, though.
You know, but
you
so
got to ball out for how many years?
10, 12.
10, 12, and then for every day you balled out, you got to spend a day in prison.
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
To me, it's not worth it, but
no, listen.
To some people, it may be.
You know, I going to jail. Honestly, there's no amount of money that's worth going to jail.
Exactly.
But because of my position that I've taken, and I have to make it make sense to me. But you know what? And I'm gonna tell you something else. You know, sometimes certain things need to happen for you in life for you to get to where you ultimately supposed to be. And that just was what it was. Like, you know, it was written. This is what I had to do. And I look back on it now, and me becoming the person that I became, I probably had to go through that to get to where I am now. So I'm not trying to harbor that or live with regrets. You know, obviously my regrets are as a mature middle-aged man, I know the devastation that I caused in my community. And for the last 20 years, I've been doing everything I can with Don Diva to talking about prison reform and recidivism, and you know, even with the stories that I do on these guys that these kids look up to, they all end with them saying, "This isn't what you want to do." You know.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly use Don Diva as a template for what I do.
Right.
You know, along with American Gangster, I did one of the episodes of there, but it's like these types of stories.
They never end well.
And that's what we try to push at the end.
That's a fact.
It's like there's never a happy ending at the end. There's never, and I got out and I had $100 million waiting for me, and you know, no big deal.
Right.
Like people come out, their families die while they're in prison.
That's true.
They don't get to go to the funerals.
That's true.
Their friends die.
That's true.
Their women move on and
that's true.
Have other relationships and other children, and they miss raising their children, which is
true.
what you missed.
Absolutely.
You had how many kids when you went in?
4.
4 kids.
Right.
And you missed a decade of their lives.
I
and
did.
A very important part of their lives.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
You have to live with that.
I do.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I spend every day since I've been home, you know, trying to make their lives and the mistakes I made make sense.
Yeah.
You know.
And you launched Don Diva.
From prison.
From prison.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess one of the things about Don Diva is you guys don't do stories on snitches.
No, we don't.
Yeah. I don't have that same guideline with
Well, you was never told on. See, so if somebody had told on you, then you would probably feel a little different about it.
And if I only interviewed people that have
one
never
side
snitched,
of the story, I get it.
Most of my interviews would be in prison, you know, phone interviews over prison, which I've done, but
listen, I understand, you know, like I started out telling you that life is about balances, so I get it. It's just for me.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm a civilian.
Yeah, and I get it.
Yeah.
You know, well, I am at this point as well,
You
but nevertheless, I understand what it is, and it's just too many people that I left behind that I have love for that I couldn't come out and do anything other than. So I just, you know, it's you know, again, when these things were done, Vlad, we were kids. You know, we were kids looking for a way out. I mean, this isn't something I would get into as a middle-aged man and say, I'm gonna start selling narcotics. It makes no sense. I mean, you know.
Well, middle age or same age in 2020, it's just not gonna work.
Well, that's not even the point of me. I'm more saying that at the time, my set of circumstances were what they were.
Right.
And I did what I thought I needed to do to take care of myself, and then at some point, my family. And then it just mushroomed and got beyond what you know.
But what I'm saying is what you did in the 80s is not possible.
It's absolutely not. No, technology
with the
is
cameras, with the cell phones that can triangulate where you were.
And kids have opportunities now that we didn't have then.
Yeah. How did it feel to walk out of that prison after a decade?
You know, I didn't spend a lot of time in prison. Like, you know, I was fortunate, like you said, to start Don Diva maybe 5 or 6 years in. So I spent a lot of time vicariously living through other people's experiences. So my body was there, but my mind wasn't. You know, I was always thinking of like, what am I gonna do? Because I've never worked in my life. Like I had a summer youth job as a kid for a few months, and here I am coming out of jail in my 30s. Like, what am I gonna do?
What year did you get out?
In 2004.
So from 1994 to 2004.
Right. Officially, I was done.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I got 8.5 years, but officially in 2004, right?
Okay, you did 8.5 years,
Right.
because you did 85% of your time.
Mm-hmm.
What had changed the most in the world once you stepped back into it?
Technology for me.
Yeah.
I remember
Smartphones weren't around.
Right.
Internet wasn't as big.
Right. I remember having two things. I went to the motor vehicle because I had to, you know, get my identification and get all my affairs in order. And I remember having to take my driver's test on the computer. And I just remember how difficult that was because when I had went away, we had stuff for accounting and little things like that. But I think I had more trouble taking the test than, you know, because of course I knew how to drive, but, you know, technology, the advancement of technology. Yeah.
I remember talking to Little D. He was the crack king of Oakland.
Yeah, we did a story.
Oh, you did a story on him?
We did it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when I asked him what the difference was, he said, well, he said when he got out, he'd be walking around the streets and people would be on their cell phones and they'd bump into each other and just not acknowledge the other person, just keep on walking. He said in prison, if you bump into each other and you don't acknowledge that person, that might be the last thing you ever do.
That's a fact.
I was in another world, man. Like I was, the look that was on me was like a person that you just let out of a cave. I mean, that's how long I had been gone. Like when I seen all these people on their phones with their head down texting and bumping into each other, man, it freaked me out, man. Because it was these people was moving so fast, right? And then in prison, you got to be kind, man. You got to say, excuse me if you bump into somebody, man. You know, you got to say, excuse me. You gotta, you know, because it's a respect thing. So when I see, you know, you people bumping into each other with their head down and whatnot, it freaked me out. I'm like, man, this is crazy.
You know, I remember talking to Shaheem about this, and he said, yeah, I mean, cutting in line, you know, when you're, you know, in line to get food, cutting in line, you have to handle that right then and there. A dirty look, everything. You're living in a situation where violence and death could break off at any minute,
you know,
from just the slightest level of disrespect.
It's war. Skipping me on a line is war. We'd have to fight. I'm standing on line going somewhere, and here you come. I could be at the commissary line getting my bag, and here you come. Yo, what the fuck? You don't see me sitting here? That quick. That quick. You know? Or just an eye. You know what I'm saying? Someone looking at you, you cross eye, and it's like, yo, fuck you looking at? What fuck you looking at? Instant.
Them dudes did a lot more time than I did as well.
But Shaheem did 6 years.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what his experience was, but in the instance of Little D, I know. But I
He
just
did
told you.
Yeah, Little D did like 30 years.
Right. So in his instance, I can identify. But for myself, like I said, I lived outside of prison. Like I was there.
So you never got caught up in the gangs or the politics
I was trying to get back home. Like meaning my focus and my attention was on reading, advancing myself, you know, just figuring out what I'm gonna do in my life. Because again, I had a date and it was around the corner. I had already did almost 3 years in just fighting.
Oh, so you had 7 more years.
So at 5, technically.
Oh, 5, right, because 8.5. Oh,
Right.
you're right. So okay.
So
I see what you're saying.
my,
So you're
my,
looking
my
at
head
it as
just
5 more
wasn't
years.
right. So, you know, I just wasn't focused on the politics and bureaucracy of all that nonsense.
I mean, they claim that you made $40 million in drug sales.
Right.
To do that and walk away with 8.5 years, it's not a bad deal.
No, and I think the number was very conservative, so I agree.
Oh, you think it was more than 40 million?
Do the math on what I told you was happening early on.
What do you think the number was?
I don't know. You know, the more money you make, the more dumb shit you find to do with it. You know what I'm saying? You just, like you said, you can only spend it so many different ways. Like, so.
What was the most ridiculous thing that you bought?
I just think I just ran around with an entourage all the time. Like, you know, like anytime I did something, it was 10 of something. Like, you know, like it's just what it was. I went on vacation, 10 people went.
Right. You're paying for everybody.
Everybody, everything. And not the guys that was getting money with me, but just my extended family, you know.
Yeah.
All-star games, fights, like, you know, so it's just, you know, so again, that's why when I reflect back on it, I mean, for a lot of people, you interview a lot of people, and that's why they call it the golden era. Like, there's some people who just can't get beyond that because their better lives is behind them because they've never experienced anything like it. And to support that, even with these rappers, you just see how they recreate that in some of their music and some of their fashion because it was just talked about. It was intoxicating, man. It just was, you know.
Right, because all the rappers wanted to be the drug dealers.
That's
they
a fact.
wanted to look like them. They wanted to dress like them.
Especially during that time, because we was young guys. See, the guys that I came up looking at was older guys but we were young, you know.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, you had a hell of a life.
Yeah, well,
and you have still a long life ahead of you.
Absolutely.
It seems like you're fully aware of everything that happened. It seems like you took responsibility.
Absolutely did.
For everything that happened. And, you know, even down to your mother, as horrific and tragic as that situation is, you have to put some of that blame on the lifestyle.
I put it all on me.
That you were in.
You
know, and that's a hard pill to swallow.
I'm living with it.
Yeah.
Presently.
You know, you could say, yes, it was these other guys and
no, it's
whatever, but it's like, had you been just a regular guy working at UPS, your mother would be still working at the bank. And
that's a fact.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
And that's tough.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
I haven't got over it, you know,
yeah.
and I doubt if I ever will.
Your father still alive?
Yes.
How did your father accept that part?
You know, I'm sure it's a burden on, that's not my fault, my brother as well, you know.
Yeah.
You know, although, like, you know, if that's the one thing that I just can't make heads or tails of. You know, the rest of it I can live with, it's part of what happens. But that's just the one thing that, you know, I just can't make sense of.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I appreciate you coming in. And I think it's really dope how you took that life that you lived and turned that into Don Diva, able to pivot. You know, I think that's the mark of a true hustler.
Right.
You know, it's one thing to be good at something and keep doing it and it eventually fades out and then you're broke at the end and you know, but to be able to be great at something and then have that come to an end and then pivot to something related and be great at that as well. Because Don Diva, I think, is a legendary publication. I think
Thank you. I appreciate the compliment.
It was. I mean, I guess it's one of the most read publications in prison.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know.
And you know, to take your experiences and your values and create a media company around it, which is something I've done as well.
Right. I witnessed you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's dope, and it's not easy to do.
It's a fact. It's a fact.
Trust me, it is not easy to do. And I think you had a very authentic voice in what it is that you do. It's very unique. You know, it's different than a VladTV or an American Gangster or whatever else. And, you know, I wish the best for you, your kids, your family, your father, your aunts, your cousins. You know, and you're just as a silver lining, you know, you became a drug dealer, but your brother actually went to Columbia University.
Yes, he did.
Which is one of an Ivy League, one of the top universities
in the country,
in the world.
Right.
Yeah, I went to UC Berkeley myself.
Okay.
And having a degree like that,
I'm very proud of my brother.
Will help him his entire life.
It absolutely does, and will.
Exactly. What does he do for a living?
He's actually he's in private industry now, but he was actually a basketball coach for St. John's and a lot of prestigious schools.
Nice. You know, and I'm sure you doing what you had to do, you were able to help him out financially, so he didn't have to go and do that, and then end up going to prison and losing all that opportunity. So you could at least look at that situation.
Oh, I have, and that was the driving force. Like everything I did was for a reason, you know.
Yeah. Okay, I appreciate you coming in.
Appreciate you having me.
No doubt.
Thank
Peace.
you.